If you're gonna make a movie, the one thing you will need 100% is a camera. You can make a movie without sound, and you can even make a movie without actors, but without a camera, you're just not making a film. So it makes sense that the better you want your movie to look, the more expensive that camera needs to be, right? Well, not necessarily. Yes, it's true that a lot of films, most films even, are shot on ARRIs or Sony Venices that cost about the same amount as a down payment for a house, but that's starting to change because at the end of the day, cameras are just tools, and as they keep getting smaller and better and cheaper, the barriers to entry are falling away. And that's great news for anyone out there making movies in 2025. So this video is all about the famous filmmakers that went against the grain and shot on cameras so consumer-oriented that you can literally buy them from Amazon. So let's take a look at how, and more importantly, why these award-winning filmmakers use cheap cameras for the big screen, and hopefully by the end you'll realize that it's not the gear holding you back. So the overriding message you're going to see throughout this video is that cameras are just tools, and when it comes to filmmaking, there's no such thing as the perfect tool, just the right tool. A lot of people would consider ARRIs to be the best cameras in the world, but for a lot of the work that I do, like in remote environments, they just don't make any sense. I'm not saying they don't make an incredible image, but they're also expensive and extremely heavy and require a lot of proprietary accessories, which could be a shoot ender if the wrong cable snaps in the middle of nowhere. And then vice versa. YouTube has been having a love affair with the FX3 for ages now, but even though I own one and really like it for a lot of stuff, I almost never use it as an A-cam because it's just not the form factor that best works for me without a whole bunch of rigging. And the same thing is true for all of the films we're going to talk about today. The point isn't that these filmmakers found some super secret, really cheap camera that's the best for making movies. It's just that they chose these consumer level tools for a specific purpose because it fit their needs and their story. So let's kick things off with a movie that a lot of you might not have seen, but it was one of the first mainstream productions to lean into using budget cameras on a big scale. This movie was shot by Shane Hurlbut, who's done so much in terms of sharing filmmaking knowledge online, and in the last couple of years has also morphed into this hilarious internet memes, which I kind of love. And Shane has shot some really big budget movies over the years, like the Will Ferrell movie Semi-Pro and Terminator Salvation, which by the way made him famous in a bad way because he was the target of that Christian Bale rant that got leaked online for adjusting a light mid-take and distracting the performance.
Oh, good for you!
So in 2012, when he was hired to film Act of Valor, which was about Navy SEALs and actually starred a bunch of real active duty soldiers, you'd think he'd have access to some heavy-hitting cameras, which he did because parts of the movie were shot on the RE435 film camera. But according to Shane, roughly 75% of the movie was shot on Canon 5D Mark IIs. At the time, the 5D was revolutionary for being the first major DSLR to shoot HD video at 24 frames a second, but it was hardly the go-to for Hollywood. And now you can pick one up off eBay for less than $300, I think, so it's a really prime example of using prosumer tech on a big stage. Now, if you've ever shot with a DSLR like I did at the start of my career, you'll know that making it work in a professional workflow isn't exactly convenient. So why on earth would a big production like that travel with 15 of them? Well, because they allowed Shane to shoot the movie in the way he wanted, which meant getting up close and being highly mobile and with a very small footprint. If you haven't seen the movie, a lot of the action scenes really do feel like you're right up there with a group of elite soldiers as they go into battle, and that's because, according to Shane anyways, they just kind of let the SEALs do their thing and it was up to the camera operators to keep up with the action. Like there's this really cool high altitude skydiving scene, and it actually was just a group of real SEALs diving out of a plane, and the way it's shot makes the audience feel like they're in the middle of it. Or in the battle scenes too, the camera is like right there with them as they clear rooms and get into gunfights, and all of that would have been incredibly hard to do with a full-size cinema rig, especially a big one like an RE435. So this is a perfect example of a DP putting the story before the tech and choosing the tool that would help bring the filmmaker's vision to life, not just the one that had the best highlight roll-off or the most dynamic range to work within the grid. So full credit to Shane here for being a bit of a trailblazer on top of giving a lot back to the filmmaking community and being a total meme daddy.
I have a question for the men. I can't figure it out.
This is cinema, baby.
Next up is easily one of my favorite movies of the last decade, and here I'm talking about The Florida Project, directed by Sean Baker and shot by Alexis Zabe. Sorry, Alexis, if I said your name wrong.
Use your TVs, VCRs, AC, what have you. Have a nice day. I love you too.
This movie is absolutely gorgeous in my opinion, and it's full of amazing colors and interesting compositions that use wide angles in really cool ways, and coverage that feels almost doc-like at times. It made a huge impact on me the first time I saw it, and I think about it all the time as a reference for what beautiful, natural cinematography can bring to a project. Now, a lot of the movie was shot on Panavision film cameras, plus a bit of Alexa Mini for the night stuff, but the reason I'm including it on this list is that the entire ending of the film was shot on iPhones, iPhone 6S's to be precise. Now, I had that exact phone back in the day, and while it was solid at the time, I hardly thought of it as overly cinematic. So what the hell was it doing on a $2 million production? Well, again, it comes down to the right tool for the right job, because according to Sean, they didn't have permission to shoot in Disneyland, which is where the scene takes place as these two little girls run through the park, if you haven't seen the movie. And honestly, they probably wouldn't have gotten that permission even if they asked, because why would Disney let a little indie film from a rival studio, A24, shoot in their park? So Sean grabbed an iPhone 6S and the two girls and then just shot the thing guerrilla style. Compared to a massive cinema rig, security at Disneyland would hardly bat an eye at a parent-aged guy filming two kids in the theme park, because everyone else is doing the same thing too. It's a beautiful ending to an incredible story, and honestly, I had no idea that it was filmed on a phone when I first watched it. Now, when I go back and look at it again, and I know that it was shot on a phone, I can tell that it doesn't quite match the rest of the footage, but honestly, who cares? I mean, yeah, it's a little bit rough when you know what to look for, but I don't think anyone finished that film and thought that the ending didn't look good, because they were all too busy thinking about how great the ending to the story was. Now, when the Hobbit movie inserted that terrible GoPro shot into the film, I definitely noticed, and it's maybe the one exception to what I'm talking about today, because that was hot garbage, but the Florida Project, stunning. And the phone was the perfect tool to get it done. And the film he made before that, Tangerine, was shot almost entirely with iPhone 5S's. Just go watch the trailer for that film and tell me it looks bad. It might not look like the Tree of Life or something, but it 100% works for the story and allowed them to work in a way that didn't attract attention. Even the comment section acknowledges how much style and character that movie has, and we all know what a cesspool the comments can be. Now we're going to talk about a bunch of films that followed this trend from one of my favorite all-time storytellers, Alex Garland. I started following Alex when I was still in high school, and he wrote the book The Beach, which, no joke, is a major part of the reason why I went on to have a career in film in the first place. I was a kid growing up in a small town, and that book made me desperate to get out into the world and have adventures, which led me to leaving the country right after school and eventually spending 10 years in Asia. He wrote a couple more books and then moved into screenwriting with 28 Days Later, which Danny Boyle directed. And I absolutely loved it, despite the fact that in general I hate horror movies. And not because I don't appreciate them, just because I get straight up scared, but that's my problem, not the filmmakers. But for some reason 28 Days Later was different, and even though I sorta couldn't wait for it to end because I was terrified, I never stopped thinking about it. And at the time, the movie made headlines because it was shot mainly on a Canon XL1, which is like a $4,000 prosumer camcorder. These days you can get those cameras for next to nothing, though I probably wouldn't because the low resolution doesn't really hold up on a modern screen, but at the time it was perfect. And again, this was a deliberate choice to serve the story because it was supposed to feel a bit home movie-esque, like you were watching found footage from the apocalypse, and it totally worked. The follow-up, 28 Weeks Later, was a bit more traditional, and it used a bunch of cameras like ARRICAM LTs and ARRIFlex 435s, but again, they leaned into the camcorder aesthetic when it made sense using a Sony HV something. I forget exactly what it was called, but it was also dirt cheap. And while Garland wasn't the writer on the sequel, he seems to have taken note of how cheaper cameras could be used to create specific looks, because when he transitioned into directing, he took a page out of the same book. Now, his first major film, Ex Machina, used a lot of really big cameras like the Sony f65, which everyone seemed to hate, but it also shot partly on the f55s, which are like $1,500 now, and even a GoPro Hero 3 made an appearance as the CCTV camera. But the real headlines, which some of you may have seen, came when he and his DP Rob Hardy used a DJI Ronin 4D for the action scenes on Civil War, and that's a camera that costs less than $7,000 on Amazon, brand new. Now, there's already been a lot of coverage of this out there on YouTube, so I'm not going to spend too much time going over it again, but if you've seen the movie, you'll know it looks amazing, and it was officially A24's highest grossing movie of all time. So why would they use a camera like that when they could have had anything they wanted? Well, let's hear it straight from Garland. All of the work I've done previously was shot very traditionally off tracks and dollies with very careful framing, and that wasn't right for this because the emphasis was all about reality, which pushed pushes you towards sort of shaky cam and handheld, but at times we wanted more control than that. So we ended up using this extraordinary camera called a 4D, a wonderful little camera, and it's affordable. It's a sort of democratizing camera. It's like $5,000, which for a film is not much. And so we used them and they really transformed the aesthetic. It gave a huge amount of freedom. So yeah, again, it was the story that made the call, not going after the best gear because you can afford it. But after making Civil War, Garland went back to writing because just apparently he wanted a break from the pressures of directing massive Hollywood movies, which is understandable. But he teamed up again with Boyle for 28 Years Later, which is the third film in the trilogy and by far the biggest budget installment of the series, with 10 times more money than the first one. And what camera did they go with? An Alexa 65? The Venice 2? No. An iPhone. Now we do have to acknowledge that when you take a look at the BTS photos and see the rig they used, you can tell that they rigged the crap out of this phone. According to the articles I could find, it was like 20 grand worth of accessories to make it work the way they wanted, but that doesn't really change much when it comes to the context of this video because that's still cheaper than the price of a single high-end cinema lens. The point is that they wanted a specific look that tied back to the original film's sort of authentic, immersive camcorder style, and so they picked the camera that they thought would give them that, which happened to be a phone. Officially, this is the highest budget movie of all time shot on a phone at roughly $75 million. So naturally, the internet being the cynical creature that it is, people started saying that this was all a marketing stunt from Apple. But when you look at the history of the franchise, I just don't buy it. They made these choices again and again throughout the series, so to me it seems totally plausible, and I don't really think Tim Cook is secretly pulling the strings here. Now, as I record this, the movie won't be out for another few months or so I can't really break down the film beyond what's in the trailer, but when I first saw it, I didn't think twice about the visuals. They look just great, and yeah, a lot of that is due to the lenses and the grade and blah blah blah, but the point is that these are high-level filmmakers purposefully using a consumer-level camera because, you guessed it, it serves their story. And then there's also the creator, which made headlines for using a $4,000 FX3 to shoot an $83 million movie that looked insane. I've already talked about it before on this channel, and it's been cited to death on YouTube, so I'm not going to spend more time on it here because it's exactly the same thing as the others. The filmmakers wanted to reduce their crew size and spend more money on travel, plus pare down the lighting package and just work faster in general, so they went with a camera that made sense. If you watch the movie, you'd probably never guess that it was shot on the same camera that I'm using to shoot this YouTube video, but it's really just illustrating the same point I've been making all along today. So what are the takeaways here, and what does that mean for you? Well, for starters, stop worrying so much about what cameras to buy, and for God's sake, stop spending a million hours searching YouTube for Blackmagic versus Sony videos, or is X camera good enough? Because the answer is probably yes. Patrick Tomaso also made a video before about kind of the same thing, and he also highlighted a movie called Blue Ruin, which looks so beautiful, and that shot on a C100 Mark I, which is now 12 years old, and you can find it for well under $1,000 these days. So if that filmmaker got those results with the C100, then yes, the Panasonic or Blackmagic or Canon or Sony or Fuji, whatever else you can dream of, will also shoot a great looking movie. You have to try really hard these days to find a camera that doesn't look good, and all you're doing by fixating on this stuff is A, making yourself crazy, and more importantly, B, actually delaying taking action to make something. Instead, focus on what camera you can afford that best suits your needs right now, and more importantly, what you think might help you execute your vision, and then just stop. I'm not saying gear doesn't matter, because it does, but only in the sense of something being the right tool for a job. You don't want to use an Alexa 65 to film a survival show, and likewise you don't want to use a GoPro to film Oppenheimer, but most of the rest is just noise. I shot 2 seasons of Alone, which is like a $10 million+ budget TV series that's on Netflix right now, with an FS7 Mark I, which is less than half the price of the FX3 I'm shooting on, because it made sense for the project. Sure, some research is a good idea just to make sure that a camera can do what you need it to do, like does it have the audio ports you need, or does the form factor make sense, or will it work with the lenses you want, but then just go and make something. I mean, Google that movie Blue Ruin I just mentioned and tell me it looked bad because the native ISO wasn't high enough or the highlight roll-off wasn't up to par. It's all kind of dumb except at the very highest levels, and it just stops you from doing the only thing that matters: taking action. The point isn't that all cameras are equal, because that's also not true. And if you're at the stage where you're shooting big budget projects, then you'll probably already know what makes the most sense based on what you like and what suits the story. But it's the newer people, the ones who just need to get going the most, who are the most susceptible to this comparison paralysis, like scrolling through Reddit threads where people fight over whether the FX3 or C80 is the better camera. High-level pros don't think like this for the most part. They just make the decision based on where they're at and what the story needs. A Pixis won't change your life, and all your creative dreams won't come true once you get an FX6. So please just pick something you can afford that does what you need it to do, and then start, because that's all that matters. Now, this is far from an exhaustive list because all sorts of filmmakers have used budget cameras for story reasons, and I could have included lots more films here. So let me know what your favorite examples are in the comments, and if you've ever gotten incredible results with a cheap camera, I'd love to hear about it. See ya.